apply to medical school in the spring and summer before their senior year of college. Non-traditional students, well, that's everybody else. Recent college graduates who were not pre-med while in school, career changers, and others who perhaps have gaps in their pre-med preparation. And I know that we got a lot of questions from such people. Well, first of all, does it really matter if you're traditional or non-traditional? There's no label on the AMCAS application for traditional or non-traditional. I think what matters is whether the applicant will successfully complete the medical school curriculum and whether the applicant will be a good doctor. And that's what the admissions committees look at. So it really doesn't matter how you get there. It's what you are when you get there. These are the most common majors. So those of you who did not major in biological sciences, fear not, because as you can see, from those 21,622 matriculants to medical school in 2019, there were 11,000 biological science, 2,000 physical science, 2,000 social science, 797 humanities, and some specialized health science people, 650, math and statistics, 168. So you could even major in math and go to medical school. Of course, I personally and Mi Mentor recommends getting a mentor or more than one mentor. You should try to find a faculty person who has experience in the medical school admissions process. Medical students can be helpful, but their experience is limited. Yeah, it's usually limited to their own application. And above all, avoid negative mentors. You don't want to have a mentor who's a hater of some kind. Now, for those of you that are, again, non-traditional and looking at post-baccalaureate programs, this is a list of all the California post-baccalaureate programs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on some of these slides because you can request a copy of the slides from the organizers. And then here's a partial list of the public health programs that are available. And there's even more of those than there are of the post-bac programs. So how do you get to medical school? Well, I think it's a good idea to get an application, whether it's to the allopathic or regular medical schools or osteopathic schools. You should get an application and look at it. Why? Because it tells you all the things that they're going to be looking for. And we'll go over all those so you can see what I'm talking about. So here's the medical schools in California. There's a couple of new ones there. The Kaiser Permanente Tyson School of Medicine, I think they have free tuition. And then there's osteopathic schools. There's a new one there in Clovis, California, for those of you in the Central Valley. Toro is in Vallejo, which is near San Francisco, and then Pomona, most of you should know where Pomona is, in the Los Angeles area. And then foreign medical schools, I didn't list those. You can go to this website and see which ones are approved by the Medical Board of California. And what does that mean? Well, if they're approved by the Medical Board of California, you don't have to prove every single class that you took. You don't have to get each class verified. They'll accept a diploma from that school. So if you're considering going to a foreign medical school, I would check that first before you go to that school. And of course, one of the things that students worry about is the MCAT scores, and there are 4 sections, if you don't know that, and the scores are centered at 500, meaning that's like the mean score. Half the people are above, half are below, and then the scores range from 472 to 528. Then people ask about grades. Well, of course, the higher the better. Upward trends are considered for students that are non-traditional. So if you started out in your first couple of years, you didn't know what you were doing and you didn't do so well, but then in your last 2 or 3 or 4 years that you're in college, your grades go up and away, well, then that's good. Post-baccalaureate programs and masters in public health or masters in health science, well, those are ways of not exactly raising your grade point average, because if you haven't done that well in your first 2 years, say, it's very hard to raise the GPA, but you can show maybe a couple of years of, very solid grade point average, let's say above a 3.5, then you're going to be in good shape. So your life isn't over if you, got on probation in the first year you were in college. And I know because that happened to me. So here's just a little slide to show about the some sample scores. And then at the bottom, because some of you have this question, almost all U.S. medical schools and many Canadian schools require you to submit the MCAT scores. Many schools do not accept MCAT scores that are more than 3 years old. So if you took your MCAT 4 years ago, you got to take it over again. And one thing, some students, will hesitate to apply to medical school because they haven't taken their MCAT. But you can submit your application before you've taken the MCAT. You just have to tell them when you're going to take it, so long as the expected date that you're going to take it fits into the deadlines of the school. You're okay. Well, it has to. The report has to come out before the deadline of the school. And now you want to know what these MCAT scores predict. Well, they're correlated with your performance in the first year of medical school. And if you do well in that, then likely you'll make it to your second year. And the MCAT scores provide comparable prediction of performance for students from different socio-demographic backgrounds. Maybe yes, maybe no. Now this slide is a really busy slide, but it's real important for you guys to look at it carefully. You can get this, if you look at it, it's table A23, I think, from the the Association of American Medical Colleges. And the main point that I want to make here is most people will freak out if they don't have like a 510 on their MCAT or something like that. But if you look here, let's just say that you did kind of average on the MCAT and your grades were maybe a 3 point, right? So people with that kind of numeric aspect, if you look there, the acceptance rate for such people, mind you, with a middle MCAT score and a 3 point, 14.2% of those people get into medical school. Okay? And sure, 85% of them didn't. But what if you're one of those 14% that gets in? So if those 14% people did not apply to medical school, well, of course, then they wouldn't have gotten in at all. All right? So that's the point about this slide, is that it's still possible to get into medical school, but these people that I'm talking about right now, you got to ask yourself, well, how did they do it? Well, that's the rest of the talk. These other parts of the application, everybody focuses on the first two that we just discussed, grades and MCATs, and they forget about the other ones. And that's kind of a mistake in my view, especially for the non-traditional students. So what's on the application? Well, there's demographics, where you're from, your parents' educational level. Some people only put one parent. I kind of like to see that they had two parents. Otherwise, I wonder what the biology was there. But I get that some people are not happy with one of their parents, or they don't know where that parent is. But I think listing them doesn't damage you at all, and shows that you know that you've dealt with whatever issues were there. Disadvantage statement, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Primary childhood residence, family income. Now, some people would put down that they don't know what the family income is. Well, geez, if you're going to go to medical school, we're kind of hoping that you can figure things out for yourself. Like, go ask your parents how much they make. Like, they pretty much have to file income taxes. That's one way to find out. And then funding of post-secondary education. Okay, on the disadvantage statement, what kinds of things are looked at? Well, economic disadvantage, low-income parents, single-parent household, poor educational opportunities, had to work during school. Those are all economic. Social disadvantages, broken home, having to care for family members like a brother or sister with ADHD, or a grandparent with Alzheimer's. Other social disadvantages are people that are victims of mental, physical, or sexual abuse. And you don't have to say, oh, no, I was sexually abused. No, you don't have to say that. But you can say that you were a victim of abuse and leave it, at that, rather than, get down to specifics and who did what to you. You don't have to say that. A significant mental or physical disability, like you're in a wheelchair or you're blind or something like that. The MCAS, as I mentioned, looks at the parent's educational level, previous applications, school administrative actions, criminal record, military record, and sometimes people have issues, but you got to explain it. I'll just leave it at that. If you have one of those issues, then you should just explain what happened, and hopefully you learned your lesson. I think the most common one I've seen is people that have to confess that they got busted for DUI. Transcripts. You got to, submit your transcripts. And of course, we tend to look more at the grades in the science classes, and if there's an upward trend, and your post-bac grade should be strong in the biological sciences again. Now, some places want to see your post-bac grades at a 3.8 level. I don't think all the schools look at it that way, but some do. Then you have your activities. We're looking at if you provided your service in underserved area or to underserved populations, or both, and that you understand the problems faced by underserved populations. Now, experiences, that's what it says on the application. If you start counting hours that you're going to do, I don't kind of consider that an experience. Experience is what you've done up to that point that you submit your application. I think it's okay if you indicate that you're going to get more hours because you're going to be doing it for another 6 months or whatever. But it can be very confusing if you put a number of hours, like say 100 hours, and that's over 2 years, and you're only covering 1 year so far, and then you're 1 year in the future. When you do that, then it's hard to tell, reviewing an application, whether the 100 hours were already done or whether those 100 hours are going into the future, and it makes a difference. So try and make that clear when you're putting down your hours. Types of activities that you might want to consider are medically related clinical activities and medically related research activities, leadership related, tutoring, especially if it's science related, community activities, like food banks and things like that, social activities, family caretaker activities, which I already mentioned, and then the total time spent on the activity. And sometimes students will forget to consider, let's say if you're doing tutoring, well, it may take you may tutor for an hour, but it may have taken you an hour to prepare for that tutoring session. So, consider that time that you devoted to that activity. and describe your involvement in the activity. And this is a quiz question. I'll give you a minute or two to, well, just a minute. How many of you know what PI stands for? How many of you think it's private investigator, or personal investigator, or principal investigator, or PI, or principal investigator? So everybody got their answer in their head? Okay, the correct answer is the very last one. Principal investigator. It's the main person that's doing the investigation. The number 3 there is somebody who's investigating, like, the Peter principle, or some other principle in physics, or in math. The one that you're using when you study, when you research, is the one at the very bottom, and it's not very impressive if you put the wrong one when you're talking about the research that you did. Okay, so be sure to get the right one. And the letters of recommendation, I put a link there that talks a lot more about the letters of recommendation and makes some recommendation. I don't agree with all of them, but I think it's worth looking at. You certainly should have at least one science professor, one non-science professor. Some people have 2 science professors. If you have a principal investigator of your research project, you'd want that person to write you a letter. And if you've been out of school and can't get an academic professor to write a letter, then you could try an employer if it's medically related. And it is possible to get too many letters. If you're reading like 25 applications and everybody submits 6 letters, do you realize how many letters that is? And some of them are like 2 or 3 pages long. Yeah, so you can get letter reading fatigue, I guarantee you. So be sure that they're good letters, because sometimes people will get 5 or 6 letters and then maybe one person says something bad about that applicant. Well, then that's just like throwing a fly in the milk, it's not good. So try and get 2 or 3 really good letters, and then I think that's plenty. Leadership skills, just a little bit on those. Organizations that you've played a leadership role, or elected offices that you've held, projects you've put together, sports leadership, even church leadership, or dorm leadership, or fraternity or sorority leadership in the hours that you did them. And then, of course, it helps if you speak foreign language. You should mention that. And these are all ones that are relevant in California. Not necessarily in order of importance. In your personal statement, this is your chance to speak directly to the admissions committee. If you don't know how, or you can't figure out how to do one, at least describe your background. What was your undergraduate educational experience? Explain any weaknesses and how you overcame them. This is a part where you can explain what you had in the disadvantage statement. Many people will try to explain how they got over their disadvantage in their disadvantage statement, which kind of makes me wonder, well, was it really a disadvantage that they got over it? So I would, in the disadvantage statement, I would stick to the disadvantages. And then if you want to explain them, how you got over them, do that in your personal statement. What was your exposure to medicine? Provide a memorable image. Perhaps that elderly lady that you helped when she had a stroke or something like that. There's some kind of image that people can see in their mind's eye. A non-traditional student should explain their path, how their path turned to medicine now. And then you might want to throw in, what are your plans after medical school? Be positive in your personal statement. I've seen people say negative things in there. And describe things that you're passionate about without having to say, I'm passionate about X. Demonstrate your passion in words. Discuss events or persons who've influenced you. What experiences have been a turning point in your life, and what do they mean to you? Have a mentor review your statement. And this fellow, Matt Simons, wrote a great essay on personal statements. This was for Harvard Business School, but the stuff that he wrote is can apply to medical school or any other place that you're turning in a personal statement. You know, follow the rules, talk about your worthiness as a candidate. Don't repeat what's in the rest of your application. So in the AMCAS application, you have a place where you describe your activities. Well, you don't have to go into detail on your activity that you already wrote about in your activity section. You can mention it, you can refer to it, but go into the details in the activity section, not in the personal statement part. And let's see, and try to reveal a greater dimension, and discuss a critical experience in medicine that you have witnessed or experienced or witnessed. Secondary applications. Again, you can see that little link there. They talk about the secondary applications, and most of what they said was pretty accurate. Of course, it usually means that you are being considered for interview based on the supplemental application. Read the question or prompt carefully, answer the question or prompt carefully, and answer what is being asked, not what is on your agenda. People try and throw extra stuff in there. Just stick to the point of what they're asking you. And complete the secondary quickly. Now, let's say you turn in your application in June, you get your secondaries, I don't know, in July, but you don't turn in the secondaries until September. Well, the person that turned in their application in August and then did their secondaries right away, they might get an interview before you because you were lagging on turning in those secondaries. So don't drag your feet on secondaries. And of course, have somebody review your secondary applications. Interviews. The old-fashioned interviews sometimes had students or faculty, or there were group interviews, and there's sample questions available online. Many schools have turned to the multiple mini-interview, and it's because it's more reliable, correlating for future performance than standard interviews. And again, you can go to that website and learn a little bit more about how they're structured. They have interview stations. Domains explored by questions are ethics, professionalism, interpersonal relationships, ability to manage, communicate, collaborate, and perform tasks. And most of the time, there's like 8 to 10 stations, and they're typically 8 minutes or less per station, usually with 1 or 2 people scoring you at each station. And it's not about what you know, it's more about how you react to the dilemmas that are being posed for you. And then for those of you who applied once and didn't get in, you can reapply. There's a lot of people that reapply and get in on the second time or even the third time. Or I was just talking to somebody who told me about somebody who had applied 10 times and finally got in and is currently practicing in Reno, Nevada. So don't submit the exact same application. If it didn't work the first time, why do you think it's going to work the second time? You got to change it around. Try to update your MCAT if you can. Get new letters if they're more than 2 years old. Definitely write a new updated personal statement. Do more activities. Get a postbac or an MPH. And avoid taking a year off. And what I mean by year off is something that's non-academic and not in a medical environment or research environment. You know, you don't want to go work for Wendy's or something. That's not going to look good. So something that keeps you close to medicine or academics is what you should do. And then what happens after medical school? Well, these folks looked at it, and what they found was that regardless of how you do in the first couple of years, the students who do well in the 3rd and 4th years are likely to continue exhibiting competent performance during internship and beyond. Demographics such as age, race, gender, marital status, and presence of children played no role in intern ratings received by program directors in their study. So if you can make it through the 3rd and 4th years of medical school and do it right, you should do okay as a doctor. That's what it means. One final thought: nobody's perfect. You're not going to be a perfect applicant. There's no perfect undergraduate pre-medical student. There's no perfect medical student or resident or perfect doctor. You guys probably already know that. And there certainly isn't a perfect professor. So that's it.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. That was great. Very informative.
You know,
Well,
So we'll start reading some of the questions from the chat, and we'll use also the ones that some of the students submitted when they registered. And so, okay. So
Q&A time, guys.
Yeah. So feel free, guys, to submit your questions on the chat. And okay. So this question, this person is saying, like, she sent her transcripts for the cycle in May. I think they were marked not received, and then when they finally find the transcripts, they said that they were outdated. So her question is if she should mention that mistake or that delay in secondaries or email schools about that delay in the transcript processing.
I don't think she needs to worry about it for the reasons that I just explained. She still has plenty of time to complete everything before the deadlines. So, as it happens this year, many of the schools are behind in their application process. So I think she's going to be fine if she just turns everything in and doesn't worry about that. Just get everything in, make sure it's done correctly now, and she'll get the appropriate review, in my opinion. I can't guarantee for other schools, but I think if she was applying, for example, to UC Davis, it would not be a problem.
Perfect. Do you have another question for me?
Yes. So one of the questions that were listed from before when people signed up for the Eventbrite was how to balance family issues or work during the application process.
Well, you have to make time for both, and that's going to be true for the rest of your life. So it's a matter of scheduling time for each of those things. You won't be able to spend all your time on your application, nor would I recommend that. And so you devote some time to your application and you devote other time to your family, and your family will or should know that there's going to be some sacrifices involved, you included. You as an applicant, you have to sacrifice your family time, and they have to sacrifice some time with you for the future. It's like an investment. So the family has to invest in you by giving you the space that you need to take care of business. Somebody said something. Go ahead.
Yes. Just a quick reminder, guys, please mute yourselves. The next question is, how do med schools view informal versus formal post-bac programs? Is one like prefer over the other?
I don't think it's a question of how the medical schools view it. I mean, they're just looking at the grade part of it. I think that the formal post-bac programs provide you with additional support services that may help you, like with your MCAT and with your application. And that's the benefit of the formal post-bac programs. There was no such thing as a post-bac program when I applied to medical school. And so my post-bac era was, was unofficial in that respect. But if you take the right classes, biological science classes, and are looking towards preparing yourself for medical school, I think you'll do well.
A built-up question on that is a post-bac GPA like a replacement for a science, or like an overall undergrad GPA, or are they combined?
They're looked at separately. So they're not combined. So at least at our school, at UC Davis, it's looked at in terms of what was your post-bac GPA, period. And you have an undergraduate GPA, and then you have a post-bac GPA. And so hopefully that post-bac GPA is pretty high.
Okay. So another question is, what should one do to boost up a low GPA?
Okay, I think I already answered that question. You can't, it's really hard to boost up a GPA. What you can do is you can have an upward trend, and you can do really well from this point forward in your classes. That's what you want to do. It's just impossible to erase all the grades that you had in the first 2 years of college if you didn't do well. It's not going to happen. But if this, third and fourth years that you're there and you do well, then schools are going to look at that. They're going to notice that, okay, the student figured it out, and now they're a good student. That's what counts. What counts is now.
Next question is, if I took classes at a community college and transfer them to my undergrad university, do I need to add the community college to the AMCAS application?
Oh, yes. Yes. You have to have all your college coursework on there.
And send transcripts from all schools.
Right.
So the next question is, do we need all 15 activities filled out in the medical school application, especially if we are working as a necessity?
Well, all you can do is what you can do. If you don't have 15, well, then you can't put 15. I think one way of looking at it is there's kind of like building blocks. If you only have 5 building blocks, you can't build a very high tower. So, you do what you can. And, you could explain that and see what the schools do with it. But it does put you at a disadvantage compared to other students. And that's why if you're working because of necessity, then work in something that's related to medicine. That's what I would say to that. Okay?
Next question is, I went to college back in my home country, which is Brazil. Does the double AMC consider that, or only US courses?
Oh, that's a question for the double AMC. I'm not sure what they would do with that. I'm thinking they don't consider them, because I'm aware of a student who actually even went to medical school in Colombia, and none of the coursework there was counted, and that person started over from scratch, going to community college, then to state college briefly, and then to UC Davis. But she's a medical student now, and she's finishing up in her 4th year. So ultimately, it may be best just to repeat those classes, because if she studied or he studied in Brazil, it may have been a while ago, and you're going to have to know things for your MCAT. And so why not just take the classes, and that way you'll be better prepared for the MCAT.
Okay, so the next question is, what do medical schools mean by diversity in medicine?
Well, what they mean is they don't necessarily want to have a cookie cutter approach to applications and have only one type of student in their school. Many of the schools recognize that especially here in California, they're treating a diverse population. So the medical school class should have people from a variety of backgrounds, and that's what they're talking about. Now, and they're not just talking about race or color or things like that, just different types of people. There can be, non-traditional students. There can be people who are interested in sports medicine, other people that are interested in psychological issues, and have done things in those areas. So they want a good variety of people in the medical school class. That's what it means.
Next question says, is there a minimum hour requirement we should meet before considering adding that activity to like the 15 activity list?
Oh, I've seen people put on, one of the activities is I went to a conference for 4 hours, and it was my most memorable activity. I don't recommend that, but that's what they did. Not so much about the hours, but about the fact that they made it their most memorable activity.
The next question is research experience very important as a non-traditional pre-med?
Well, this question applies to pre-meds in general, okay? You have to understand who is on an admissions committee. They're usually faculty members from the university, some of whom see patients, and some of whom maybe do research on rats or something, okay, or biochemistry research or some other kind of research. And so those persons that do that kind of research, they naturally look more favorably upon people who have done research. And the other folks, of course, naturally tend to favor people who've done clinical stuff. And somehow out of that mixture is what creates a diverse medical school. So to the extent that you can have a research activity on your application, it's going to help you. It's certainly not going to hurt you. And so in those, you have 15 different activities that you can mention. It would be nice if at least one of those had something to do with research. It doesn't have to be, but it's certainly nice that you're more likely to appeal to maybe that one person on the committee that's going to have the deciding vote.
Okay, I'll ask a question. One of the students or one of the participants here is asking if, so they took a prerequisite at a community college. How is that prerequisite viewed by the medical schools versus that same one that could have been taken at a four-year college? Like, is there a difference, for example, like inorganic chem or organic OChem taken at a community college versus at a four-year college?
Well, I think it's very difficult to make that comparison, because what I usually say is an A is an A is an A. So if you got an A in your OChem in community college, or you got your A in OChem at Cal Berkeley, how am I going to compare those? How am I going to say, oh, the people at Cal Berkeley are so much smarter, this means so much more than that A that the person got in community college? I think for the most part, yeah, there might be a little bit of snobbishness involved, but for the most part, it's that grade point average that the computer is going to look at in terms of deciding whether they're going to put you in the pile that gets reviewed for a secondary application.
Another question is, if you complete an informal post-bacc program, is there a specific number of classes that you should take to be considered enough units?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think you would, if you're going to do that, you might want to compare what you're doing to what the post-bacc programs recommend for students, because again, you're going to be in the same pile with those folks. And so if they're going to compare the unofficial with the official, I think they would compare the amount of coursework that you did. Just because you take one or two science classes after you graduate and you do well in those, that's not the same as spending a whole year taking biological science classes and doing well in those. So it's not a specific number, but I would try and compare myself to other post-bacc programs.
So the next question is, what does it mean to be an underrepresented applicant in medicine?
Yeah, there's a specific definition for underrepresented in the MCAS website, and you can look that one up. I think I put it in the answers to the questions that I did in writing. So, and I don't recall exactly what they say. If you have it in front of you, go ahead and read it.
Yeah. So the definition is underrepresented in medicine means those racial and ethnic populations that are underrepresented in the medical profession relative to their numbers in the general population.
Yeah, that usually means like African Americans, Latinx, and Native American. Those are the ones that are underrepresented. But also, for example, Hmong population is underrepresented. So it's not just the sort of traditional ones. There are some other smaller groups that are underrepresented.
The next question is, does growing up in foster care can be considered as a disadvantage?
Going up where?
In foster care?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yes. In fact, the dean of the medical school at UC Davis, not the current dean, but one of the past deans, she herself was a foster child. And so, yeah, that was considered as a disadvantage.
Okay, so next question is, how do I ease possible concerns from medical schools about my age?
Well, it's against the law to discriminate against people because of their age. I went to school when I was in school as a medical student, one of my classmates was 40 years old, and he was already a lawyer. And in the spare time he had while he was in medical school, he worked at a free legal clinic for teens, and he became a pediatrician after medical school. So, unless the person's like 80 years old, I don't think it's going to be an issue.
The next one says,
I'll
you
get
have
one after
one.
you.
Oh, okay. The next one says, regarding letters of recommendation, would you recommend submitting them all by the primary application or wait until receiving secondaries to see what each school is asking for?
No, you have to send them before that because you want to have your packet complete so that it can be evaluated properly. So I would do them as soon as you can.
Yeah, and MSTAR actually, some schools tell you which kind of letters they're looking for.
Sure.
Next one, Noah.
Next one. All right. So this participant said he has a lower undergraduate GPA, completed a post-bac to improve grades, and question is, should he address the lower undergrad GPA in his secondaries, or should he let the grades speak for themselves?
Well, the secondaries might not ask about that, or they might. So he certainly can talk about it in the secondaries if there's room, if they ask about it. Probably if it's significant enough, you might want to talk about it in your personal statement.
Okay.
So students want to know your personal story and what you encountered when applying to medical school or when you were in medical school, like what challenges you overcame.
I think the challenges I overcame was I had a difficult time due to family responsibilities in my first couple of years at UC Davis. And then after that, I figured out how to study better. I changed from engineering, which I wasn't doing well, to biological sciences. I did much better. I was involved in a number of community activities. I cut back on the family responsibility things, and spent an extra year. So I was a 5-year undergraduate. But those last 3 years were practically all biological science classes. So in essence, that was the 5th year was an informal post-bac. and I selected classes primarily because I was interested in the things that I took. And it just so happened, I found out later when I was in medical school, that many of those classes were things that we were going to study in medical school, like immunology, virology, physiology, cell biology. So you can be preparing yourself for medical school even before you get there. So those were the things. Now, in terms of the school itself, once I got there, and I think it mentions that I went to the University of California, San Francisco. The classes required study, and so you had to study, and so by that time I had already adjusted to studying with all the other pre-meds. Now we're in medical school, it's the same types of folks. In fact, some of them I recognized from the classes that I had taken at UC Davis. They had been accepted to UCSF as well. So there was just sort of a continuation there, and I was fortunate that I did not experience any kind of what people nowadays describe as microaggressions, or if I did, I didn't pay attention to them. And so medical school was kind of a shock in terms of the things that you had to do. I didn't realize all the stuff that would happen in medical school, but I learned how to adjust, and I was able to, even though it took me 5 years to get through undergraduate, it only took me 4 years to finish medical school. So I felt pretty good about that. Other questions?
Yes, there's a lot. So the next one says, it's a question regarding the disadvantage statement. Like, if you can provide a deeper explanation on how to end the disadvantage statement on a positive note without necessarily saying, I got over this, or like I overcame this.
Well, I don't know that you necessarily need to end it on a positive note. Your whole application is a positive note, in theory, particularly your personal statement. That's the positive note. I don't think that you have to put the positive note in the disadvantage statement, because it's kind of contrary to the point of the disadvantage statement. The disadvantage statement is to let them know what were the issues and problems that you had. The solutions, that's what you did. That's your entire application. And the fact that your grades went up and that all the other stuff that you did, that's the positive note. I don't know what, and I know this is not a uniform thought out there. I know many students are told to, end it on a positive note. You can make your own choice on that. But personally, I believe in following the instructions. And the instruction is talk about disadvantage. It doesn't say, tell me how you got over your disadvantage. It just says, tell me about your disadvantage.
Makes sense.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and go next. Where's the question I had? The student asked, let's see. What is something that you should strictly stay away when it comes to the interviews?
Well,
I guess that's
well,
how we worded it.
Well, usually in interviews, it's the interviewer is supposed to stay away from certain topics. You don't want to get into discussions about, very controversial subjects like, they're not supposed to ask you about things about abortion, say, for example. But you shouldn't bring them up either. It's not necessary to do that. And it's not necessary to make any negative statements. So you want to keep things on a positive note and recognize that no matter what your feelings are, deeply held beliefs are, your patients may not have any of those beliefs. You may be a very religious person, and you're going to get a patient who believes in some other deity or doesn't even believe, a non-believer totally. But that's not for you to judge as a doctor. Your job is to help that person with their health, and their internal politics of what they believe in, that's not of your concern, except to the extent of, for example, if it's somebody that doesn't believe in blood transfusions, well, you're not going to forcibly give them a blood transfusion, right? Except under very extraordinary circumstances that apply to kids only, but not for an adult. So that's, you have to be able to maintain that distance.
Okay.
So the next question is, do you have any advice on applying to medical school as a DACA student?
No, because I wasn't a DACA student. They didn't exist when I was a student. All I can say is that, when I was born, my parents were undocumented, and later they got their papers straightened out, and they both became citizens. But when they were talking about taking away citizenship from anchor babies, I thought, holy cow, they might take away my citizenship because I was an anchor baby. So, but in terms of the DACA students, you have to look at the individual schools and see what their requirements are. Some students will accept DACA students, some will not.
Yeah, and we'll be making more DACA related events in the future, so just stay tuned. The next question says.
Oh wait, can I say one comment on that? I did notice that President Trump was making noises about providing a path to citizenship for DACA students. So who knows if he's really kind of come through on that? But I did see that recently in the news.
Yeah, hopefully. Okay, next question says, from your experience as an admissions officer, can you discuss how faith and faith-based activities are viewed in an application? Is it necessarily negatively viewed if an applicant has a lot of like faith or church-related activities?
Well, I think I mentioned in my talk that you could count those activities. It's just how it's presented. It would be similar to, whether the applicant is a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian. That shouldn't impact on how you view them as a student. And in terms of faith-based activities, many times those activities are very meaningful, like going to build houses for homeless people or doing medical missions. So certainly those things are important, and they may represent a long-term investment of time, like this example, maybe teaching Sunday school for 10 years, something like that. So activities that show involvement with the community, and it doesn't matter what kind of community it is, except if it's a criminal community, then I think that it's okay to talk about them. You have to be careful when you're talking about them because, as an example, I recall reading a personal statement where the applicant made a disparaging comment about another religion. And so that's not going to go over well. So you can talk about your religion, but don't start, criticizing other religions because that won't go over well. And it just goes along with the idea of not making negative statements.
Okay.
Hello.
Me?
Would you like to ask a question? Yeah.
All right, so this question is, so this person's been out of school for several years, out of college, and let's see here. So in regards to the personal statement and their meaningful activities, should they focus more on what they did recently or something that they, I guess, may have started during undergrad, since it was so long ago?
I think it depends on the amount of time they spent on the activity. I mean, if they spent, a couple of thousand hours on something when they were an undergraduate, of course they should mention that. But then if that was relevant to their medical plans, then they got to explain, well, if you were so deep into medicine back then, what took you so long? And there may be a good explanation, but there should be some explanation.
Okay. Oh, a quick little question on that too. So in regards to hours, how are they viewed? Specifically, I know some people, you mentioned that they can add the conference that they did. But say for an activity that they did for a few months, something that's 100 hours versus 800 hours, how much more is that weighted? The 800 hour versus 100, 200, 300. Because even though 200, 300 is still a lot, but some students have, close to 1,000 maybe, which is
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, you sort of answer your own question. The number of hours does count because it demonstrates the commitment to whatever activity it was, and especially if it was, say, a research activity or it was a clinical activity where you're actually doing something, not just shadowing, because some people have a bunch of shadowing hours, but that doesn't demonstrate very much leadership or initiative to be a shadow. If you're a scribe or a technician or an EMT, nurse's aide, something like that, where you're actually hands-on with the patients, then that, of course, shows more interest and more initiative in terms of preparing yourself for a health career. So much like grades and MCATs, more is better.
Okay. So the next question is, what is the difference between a formal and an informal post-bac program, and what classes would be recommended to take for an informal post-bac?
Oh, well, that's a trick question because you already asked that question. So I would just refer you to watch the previous answer on that one. Next question.
So next question says, what would be considered as old or outdated grades? For example, if we started college in 2014 and now currently graduated from my university and still trying to apply to a post-bac, will I need to repeat those classes?
No. Whatever, if let's say you took your OChem 4 years ago, no, you don't need to repeat it. You've already done that requirement. So you don't need to repeat it. You may want to take some sort of refresher course just so you can do better on the MCAT. But once you've completed the required course, a year of physics or a year of chemistry or whatever, no, you don't do it again. So in other words, the grades don't get stale. How's that?
okay. Just answering one of the participants' questions. Okay, let me pick one. And okay, so this person, will medical school frown upon an online bachelor's degree? What if the prerequisites were done in person?
Wait, could you repeat that one again?
Let's see. So will medical schools frown upon an online bachelor's degree, even though the prerequisites were done in person?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think probably it would not be a problem if the prerequisites were done in person, because that's really what they care about is the prerequisites. Make sure that you've got those. And then if the school is accredited, whether it's online or not, I think it's not going to make a difference. But it has to be accredited, of course.
Okay.
So the next question is, students would like to know your thoughts on the imposter syndrome.
Oh, one of my favorite topics. Well, I think the way to look at that, there's certainly people that have that feeling, but let's say many of our first generation students might have that sensation. And I think it's important not to buy into that in this sense that they are not recognizing their own merits and how far they've traveled. The difference between, say, where their grandparents were and what they were doing and what the student is currently doing represents a huge accomplishment relative to what their parents or grandparents were doing. And so, as one of the doctors said in a recent conference, the people who might not belong there are the other people that are kind of making you feel like you're an imposter, because you're there for the right reasons and you belong there because of what you've already accomplished. So, myself, when I was in school, I just, the thought never crossed my mind. I just wouldn't consider that I didn't belong there. I mean, maybe I didn't fit in with other people and I didn't have the money they did, but I was there on my own merits. When they accept you to medical school, they accept you on your merits. And so you need to take that as a definition that A, you belong there, and B, don't, put yourself down by believing that you don't belong there. That's you putting yourself down. So that's really the main reason why I don't believe in that stuff, because I don't believe in putting myself down. I mean, you got plenty of people that are going to do that for you. So why would you do it yourself?
The next question says, what parts of the application did you personally enjoy or value reading?
Well, I think the most interesting part, and I'll just comment that, over the years, I've read several thousand applications, and they take about 45 minutes to an hour to read each. And usually the most interesting things are the personal statement and the letters of recommendation and the activities. And you want the things to be consistent. Let's just say that if there's an inconsistency there and I run across it, you better watch out, because I'm not very happy when people either lie on their application or try to hide stuff or try to mislead the admissions committee. And just as an example, once upon a time I reviewed an application, and this person was from a broken home and they were claiming disadvantage. But I won't say how I was able to figure it out. I was able to figure out that although the person had been raised by the mom, the dad was a physician. And the applicant could have easily said, yeah, my dad's a physician, they're not a part of my life. They didn't do that. So anyway, so I just felt like the person was trying to deceive, and of course that was not a good thing to do. And somebody else may have looked at it differently, or they may not have even realized it. But that part of it is the luck of the draw as to whether the person that reviews your application is going to catch the sneaky part or not. If you want to take a chance on it, I guess you can do that, but you're taking a chance. Next question.
Next question. What is clinical experience? Like defining it in an example and one that's not an example, especially
well,
yeah, go ahead.
When you're working with people, that's clinical experience. Whatever it is, either receptionist or if you're taking blood pressures, where you're dealing with people. The non-clinical would be things like working in a research laboratory, studying rat brains. That's not clinical, but it is research, and it may be relevant to medicine, so it may count just as much for the reasons that I explained earlier.
Yes. So the next question is, I have a question okay, so this person graduated a couple years ago with a low GPA due to uncontrollable situations. However, they feel that they have a strong clinical experience and strong letters of recs. They are currently taking refresher courses at a community college in order to do their best on the MCAT. They're asking, in what other ways can they improve their GPA aspect on their application? And do you recommend that she should apply directly to medical school?
Well, without knowing the specific numbers, it's hard to make that. But if the issue is low grades, then post-bac or a master's in public health or a master's in health sciences would be the way to go. Because I think if you have 2 years of master's degree work and you've done well in those classes, that's pretty much enough to convince many admissions committees that you're ready to go to medical school if that's what you want to do. So that would be the way to deal with that.
Yes.
Okay.
Liz?
Is it?
Yes.
Oh, Liz's turn?
Yeah. This one was really interesting. It was like, from your experience, what have been the most powerful letters of recommendation you've reviewed?
Yeah, those are ones where the professor or the letter writer obviously knows the person and speaks very highly of them. And it's surprising that sometimes they'll say very nice things, but at the very end they say, yeah, I recommend this person for medical school. They need to kind of be emphatic at the end where they say, you know, this person will be a superstar medical student or something like that. To really, and that they recommend them. Okay, I recommend this person because I think they are going to be a star at medical school. Something along those lines. So that and the fact that they actually have something to say about the applicant that indicates that they really know the applicant.
Yes. Noelle, would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Let's see. So it's kind of similar to the previous question. What was like the most personal statement, or how was it worded? I guess a personal statement that stood out to you, and how was it different to others?
Okay, there are several. I'll just mention, because there was something on Mi Mentor about writing personal statements, and I do not consider myself any kind of a genius, and I had to take bonehead English when I was in college, but I wrote my personal statement in one afternoon. And I know people struggle months writing a personal statement, and I find it difficult to understand why it takes them so long to write it. I recommend that people just write whatever comes in their head, come up with a document, and then have people help them edit it. And you can edit it down to the size that'll fit into the AMCAS application. So the things that stand out, if you recall in the lecture, I mentioned having an image. And one example that I still remember, and I probably reviewed this application like over 20 years ago. There was a young lady who had joined the Peace Corps, and she went to Africa, and on the way to the location that she was going to assign to in the Peace Corps, she was riding a motorcycle, as a passenger, and there was an accident, and her leg got damaged and was amputated. And so she came back to the United States and, was fixed up with an artificial leg. And then she returned to Africa to do her Peace Corps obligation. That was probably the only time I ever, and then I was actually sitting on the committee in which we didn't even mention the person's name, just said, oh yeah, the one who's got her leg cut off in Africa? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Accept. It was just, there was no discussion on that lady because the image was so powerful. So that's why I mentioned that sometimes the image can be powerful. And if you have that, some story that's very powerful, people will remember it.
Yes. So another question is, being interested in an MD/PhD dual program, how would completing a PhD before applying to the MD look? And if you already had a PhD, oh, sorry, that's not a part of the question.
Okay. Well, I'll just tell you, when I was in medical school, one of our professors was in our class. And so we asked him, well, why are you in this medical school class? You have a PhD already. And his answer was, again, this was at UCSF, his answer was that it was easier to get grants as an MD than it was as a PhD. So I would say just go for the MD degree. Yeah, you don't have to be greedy. Anything that you can do as a PhD, you can do as an MD, but not vice versa. So as an MD, you can do any kind of research you want. You can do research on people or rats or whatever you want. As a PhD, you're limited to, non-human research.
Is it my turn?
Liz's or yours, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the student, so I graduated with a bachelor's in public health with a low GPA. Would Dr. Diaz recommend a formal postbac? I'm hesitant to apply for MPH because they would ask me, why are you pursuing an MPH and not directly applying to medical school instead? Advisors have also told me that an MPH will not have an impact on my undergraduate GPA.
Well, they're right. It won't have an impact on that GPA. But that's not what's going to be looked at. What's going to be looked at is the 2 years that they spend in the MPH program. And if they do really well in that MPH program, I think that they'll have a decent chance to get into a medical school somewhere. There's, as I said, whoever that person is not going to be able to do anything about that undergraduate GPA. So forget about it. Just worry about today. Do as well as you can today. Get a good score on your MCAT, and there are schools that will consider you.
Yes.
And in terms of the postbac, yeah, I mean, the postbac would be fine, or an MPH. And most of the MPH programs know that there are students that are in their program that are there because they want to go to medical school. So what? There's plenty of doctors that are out there that have an MD, MPH. That's how they got it. So that's not an issue in most cases. Go ahead.
So the next question is, I'm not sure if this was already answered. I feel like it was, but how should one find a mentor to guide you through the application process?
Well, you have to ask, and you may. What I see most often is that people are working in, let's say, a free clinic, and they're not constantly busy with the patients, and yet they'll sit around and chat with each other rather than walking up to one of the attendings who's also just chit-chatting with another attending and asking them questions about, how to go about applying to medical school, or even asking them, well, would you be willing to mentor me or something like that? So you just have to ask.
Noel?
My turn. Okay. Let's see. One question. So this person recently got a job offer to be a standardized patient. Can this job be classified as medical related?
Yeah, I think I would consider it that way. I don't know if everybody would, but I would.
And what is a standardized patient? At least for mine. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's somebody who plays like they're a patient for teaching purposes.
Oh, for like maybe MMI or something, or just
like an MMI or teaching medical students how to do, let's say, some of the more unpleasant exams that are done, or just a regular, like a lung exam or something, and you have a real live body to examine instead of each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So another question is, the student is asking, what made you choose family medicine?
Oh, well, family medicine is a specialty that gets a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So you do some orthopedics, you do some OB, you do some pediatrics, you do some internal medicine, you do some emergency medicine. So it's not as easy to get bored doing family medicine. When you become a specialist, you know, let's say you become a kidney specialist. Well, you're only going to see people with kidney problems. And then your kid has a sore throat and you go, I got to call a pediatrician and ask them what to do. When you're a family doctor, you don't do that. You would take care of it yourself. In fact, the kidney specialist or GI medicine specialist may call you and say, "Hey, I have a sore throat. What should I do?" So it just depends on what you're comfortable with. You know, some people feel comfortable because they know everything there is to know about kidneys, and some people feel comfortable because they know a little bit about everything, like a handyman.
Okay. I'll do the next question. Which schools do you know of that are friendly towards non-traditional applicants and or those considered URM?
Well, I think pretty much all the schools in California will consider people. They are all trying to get a diverse background. Some are a little more flexible than others. But overall, I mean, I wouldn't rule any of the schools out in California on that basis.
All right. Parmi.
So this next question is, the student is in the process of completing their UC Davis secondary, and one of the questions asks about listing activities and gives the option to select the same activities as those in the primary. Would you be able to provide insight on how to approach this, and if it is okay to restate what was written in the activities for the primary application?
I don't think they have very much space on the secondary to write stuff. So they probably would just have to summarize it, and if the instruction says that they can use the activities that are already on there, then yeah, I would do that. You might expand a little bit on it, or make a slightly different comment about it. But of course, since it says you can use those, then yeah, I would use the ones that are already there.
Yes.
All right.
And as I said earlier, we need to get the secondary done ASAP so that they can get their interview.
Okay, so it looks like that was the last question. It is 1 minute till 5. To respect everybody's time, we will wrap it up and end the event. Again, thank you all for attending. Thank you, Dr. Mark Diaz, for being our speaker and giving us all this great information.
Before
go ahead.
any more people log out, I wanted to mention that we have our current medical school readiness series application is open. So it's a 1-year program that we meet monthly to go over like different parts of the med school application. It's open for PA and pre-meds, and it's only open for those in California. So check it out on ementor.org. Dr. Diaz has a profile on there too, and he's pretty active, so you can find him on there. And thank you again for your time. Any questions, feel free to reach out to us through the app.
Yeah, thank you again.
Diaz.
Okay.
Thank you.
I hope to see you guys in next another Together We Mentor event. And again, for the survey, please complete the post-event survey. With the completion of that, you get the PowerPoints. So it'll really help us if you do that survey. Thank you. Any other words, anyone? Or goodbyes?
I also added the post-survey link on the chat. You will get the link through email and like in the next 10 minutes as well.
Awesome.
I'm sorry, is there an email we can have to connect with Dr. Diaz?
We
It'll
will
be in the
share
PowerPoint.
it was on the PowerPoint, and we'll share that contact information after you complete the post survey.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That was
Right.
good. That was good. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Diaz.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Diaz.
Okay.
Thank
Have a
you.
nice evening.
All right. You too.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Ciao.